Jeff Johannigman is the founder of People Type Consulting, an Austin-based firm that works with companies who want to improve their teamwork and leadership, and with individuals who want to find more fulfilling careers. Mia, pay attention here. Jeff's career spans a broad spectrum of industries, including software startups, nonprofit agencies, universities, and Fortune 50 corporations. Along the way, he has managed worldwide staffing for the Tivoli Systems division of IBM. He has established one of the country's first alumni career services for the University of Texas. He personally coached hundreds of people to find greater career success and fulfillment. He founded 2 successful software companies, produced over 20 published computer games. He also is the founder of a cool meetup called Austin Geeks and Gamers. I hope you'll all check that out. He has earned a Master of Arts in Human Services from St. Edward's University, a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from Cornell University. He is an active member of the American Society for Training and Development, the Austin Career Development Network, and Toastmasters International. Let's give it up for Jeff Johannigman.
All right. Good morning!
Good morning!
How are we all doing?
Yeah.
We are all job-free today. It's a nice Friday afternoon. Everybody else is stuck in offices. I've been where you've been, by the way, and part of what qualified me to be a really good career coach for people who've been out of place is that having worked in the game industry, I've been laid off more times than anybody in the room. I can tell you. So I know where you guys come from, know where you've been there myself many, many, many times. Too many to count, actually, and more than I want to admit to. Toughest thing that you're going to have to learn about this entire morning, how to pronounce my name. Pronounce Jeff, okay? People always ask about that last name. What is it? Dutch, Swedish, Norwegian, Swahili? What the heck is it? It's an old German name. Yeah, unfortunately, the projector's a little dim over here. There. Oh, that's cool. There we go. Now it's a little more readable. It's actually a little German name. Back in the old country, it used to be pronounced more like Johannigman. And then the Johannigmans moved to Ohio, where I grew up, so I learned Johannigman. The American pronunciation, a little more nasally. Yeah, Johannigman. Anything along those lines. And Kathy read this whole bio about me, which makes me sound really nice and serious and professional. But the gist of what we're talking about today is all about turning work into play, and it's something I learned a lot about when I began my career in the computer game industry. So I graduated with a degree in computer science, and way back when, back in 1900, this was my first computer, the Atari 800. Now I see sufficient gray hairs in the audience that some of you may remember this. Okay? So it has a disk drive about the size of a shoebox. And truth to tell, I did not have that disk drive when I first got my computer, because I could not afford the $800 it cost for one of those disk drives, so I had to get the $150 cassette tape recorder to save my programs on. So my very first game was actually published on a cassette tape back in 1982, I believe was the year that it was actually first published. And then I worked in the computer game industry for many, many, many years for companies like these. Any of these names in business today? One. Okay. Yeah, there's one on that list that is still in business today. Electronic Arts. I joined a little startup company, about 40 or 50 people at the time, called Electronic Arts. At the time, we had a project that had run hundreds of thousands of dollars over budget, was 6 months behind schedule, and we knew we had to kill it because we would never make back the money we had already sunk into Madden football. So we desperately wanted to kill that thing back then. Thank God cooler minds prevailed. But otherwise, many of these companies I worked for went belly up at some point in time or another. Most game companies have the lifespan of a mayfly, which is how I got so much experience in going through the layoff process. My first 2 years out of college, I went through 3 layoffs. But this gives you an idea of some of the kinds of games that I worked on. This was for the Commodore 64, Demon Stalkers. This was for one of the early IBM PCs, a game called Savage Empire. And you can see who our target audience was. She has really big hair.
Huge tracts of land.
Yes, 1980s kind of hairdo there on that whole field. And then most successful game, probably in my career, was a game called Master of Orion, which was a 4X, explore the galaxy, exploit your planetary resources, expand your empire, and of course exterminate your enemies. But people ask me the question of why did I choose to leave this exciting, glamorous game industry way back when? And the secret behind that actually was residing on that ad there a second ago. That ad there, if you expand on one of those quotes, was this quote from one of the critics who reviewed our game for Computer Gaming World. Said, "This product will offer enough late nights and missed appointments to make it a definite Game of the Year candidate, as well as Exhibit A in many divorce cases." And a quote like that kind of makes you think about it. Not just the fact that the editors of Computer Gaming World said that, but the fact that we wanted to put it into an ad. This is a good thing. Yeah, cool. So I really had to ask myself, in terms of games, what am I doing to people's lives? The highest compliments we got as game designers were the guys who would go, "Dude, you know how many hours I wasted on your game? I was like up all night, I called in sick the next day at work, my old lady's ready to throw me out, it was awesome." Great. Mm-hmm. So I decided to try to use my powers for good. Because as we all know, with great power comes great responsibility. Oh, you read the same comics I did. And I began asking myself, how can this be used for good? And then the inspiration came from my cat. And I started thinking about, what is that cat doing? It's a multiple choice question. Is that cat playing? Is that cat learning? Is that cat working? Or all of the above? Well, that part of its work. It's got to make its own dinner that way. And my cat still occasionally brings home gifts for me on the back porch. Good mouse on there. I realize we human beings are the only creatures on the planet stupid enough to separate work from play. You watch a dog go fetching a bone, fetching a stick. You watch cats playing with little toy mice. They're all having a great time. And they're learning how to bring home the bacon, as it were, or the mouse. So I think that one of the mottos that I like to live by is cogito ergo ludo, to get really twisted in Latin. Cogito ergo ludo means I think, therefore I play. And this is not, by the way, this talk is not about this stuff. We get to talking about all these nice little tech startups where people say we work hard, we play hard. I'd say something like that, but like companies. And those companies all have the foosball tables and the ping pong tables and so on and so forth. That's just frosting on the cake. That's not really what we're talking about. I'm talking about making your work more playful itself. So, to figure out what that means, I had to start by trying to define my terms and define what we mean by play. So I went out and did a little research and found somebody who actually studies the idea of play. There is somebody named Bob Fagan who is, quote, an animal play researcher. Really? Yeah. And by the way, I'm going to ask if I can get a couple volunteers. I brought along some handouts which have some of this information on it, so you don't have to take too many notes. So if I could ask somebody to help me pass out the handouts to everybody, get these circulated around the room. Because there's some interesting, cool research I'm going to be talking about, and there's information on the back of the handouts so you don't have to write down Bob Fagan's name. But he was asked, why do animals play? And he really spent a lot of time thinking about his answer for this, because it was not intuitively obvious. And he finally came up with this answer. He said, in a world continuously presenting unique challenges and ambiguity. By the way, who here ever worked for Dell? Dealing with ambiguity. Okay, primary job. In a world continuously presenting unique challenges and ambiguity, play prepares the bears for an evolving planet. Play is a survival skill. Play teaches us how to interact with the environment successfully, and what we can and can't do, and how we can manipulate things. So his definition of play had these qualities to it. It's something that is apparently, and I emphasize the term, apparently purposeless. It is voluntary. We choose to do it mostly because it's attractive and it's fun. There's something kind of cool about it that just stokes our juices. When we are at play, we lose track of time. Anybody get so engrossed in whatever you were playing at that you look up at the clock and go, oh my God, it's 2 o'clock, I should have had lunch. Wait, that's 2 o'clock in the morning. I really should have had lunch. You lose track of time. You also lose awareness of self. If you actually, somebody were to catch snapshots of you really at play, you look really time. So, also, there's improvisational potential. We make things up as we go along. We try new things out. And that's part of how we adapt and how we learn in the process of play. And there's a continuation desire, because the worst thing in the world when I was a kid playing was hearing Mom call me back home for dinner. You know, that ends the playtime. Now, definition of play there, and we all know the opposite of play is? No. It's depression. Depression. Okay? Work and play can be the same thing, but when we do not have enough playfulness in our lives, we end up succumbing to the epidemic of depression that is going around. And so that's part of the reason I'm here today, is to be more playful in our lives and stop taking everything so serious. He also defined a cycle of play, that play has these different steps to it. And then all this dissection of play, it's kind of like dissecting a frog. You kind of understand how it works, but it loses a little of the liveliness in the process. So, it begins with a certain amount of anticipation. There's something unknown in the environment. Maybe it's what your opponent's going to do or what's going to happen. But when it happens, there's an element of surprise to it, and you have to figure out what to do about it. So typically it's a pleasant surprise, otherwise we wouldn't be playing at it. But from that experience, we gain some more understanding about how the thing that we're interacting with works, and what we can do and how we can master and manipulate whatever it is we're playing with. And we get better and better at it, so we develop some strength with those skills to the point where we can improvise a little bit more, try some new things out with some poise. And whenever we're trying something new out, then that means we're not quite sure what's going to happen next. So it cycles back around to anticipating what's going to happen next when I try this different thing with it. And it comes back around and around and around on there. So does that mean that play can be an important part of your work? I would argue that it does give us a competitive advantage. Take a look at these two guys. And we go back to when I first got into the computer game business and the rise of the personal computer era in the late 80s. Steve Jobs, on your left. John Akers, the president of IBM in the late 80s during the time of the personal computer revolution. Which of those two would you say was the more playful?
Jobs.
And who produced the more innovative solutions? And where is IBM when it comes to the personal computer market today? They got out of it. They never really quite got the hang of how to make that their business. Where are you going to find the more creative problem solvers? Which of those two places? Okay. Anybody know where that one is? That's Google. Anybody know where this? I'm not even going to ask. I'm going to get a dozen different concepts about where that might be. But I know we've all worked in offices that look much more like that. All right, seventh circle of hell. Yes. So, but I want you to think about how counterintuitive some of these ideas are. Go back about 20 years. We're going to go back to 1995, make you guys all venture capitalists. And we realized back in the mid-90s that this internet revolution is happening. We got this information superhighway thing, and these World Wide Webs all over the place. And we realized that the printed, paper-bound encyclopedias are going to soon be replaced. So we want to catch that revolution. And we want to bet on who's going to create a successful online encyclopedia. So there's one company there, Fortune 100 technology company, has a huge staff, well-paid writers, professionals, editors, project managers, and they've got a budget of millions and millions of dollars that they can use for sales and marketing of this. Sound good so far? Right? Then you've got this other company says, oh, we're not going to pay our writers. It's just going to be kind of a grassroots thing. They're just going to do it for the fun of it. So we're going to get them to all volunteer for just the funsies because it's kind of neat to get to write encyclopedia articles. Huh? And we're going to have some rough guidelines, but we're not really going to centrally manage them. We're not going to micromanage. We're just going to kind of coordinate a little bit about how it should do. And then we're just going to give it away. Okay, we're not actually going to try to sell it in stores. We're just going to give it away. So if you were a venture capitalist 20 years ago, who would you have invested in?
Probably the first one.
The first one, right? Anybody know who that first one is?
Like Kotak or Columbia.
Encarta. Does anybody here remember Encarta? Oh, I got a few gray hairs in the back. Okay, yeah. Anybody actually use Encarta ever? Anybody? Mueller? Anybody? Okay. Yeah. All right, and of course, what's the other one? Wikipedia. So what?
As a venture capitalist, I'm looking to make money. Wikipedia doesn't make any money.
They're starting to. Slowly but surely.
20 years later.
Yep. So it's a slow build there. But in terms of actually getting consumer eyes and being a successful product, it's definitely much more successful there. And they did it because they made the whole process of creating encyclopedia entries fun. People do it for the fun of it, the prestige of it, and so on. So we got a handle on what is fun. Let's talk about what's a game. Be more specific about what is a game. And I went and looked to some of my fellow game designers to get their definitions of what defines a game. This one comes from Greg Kostikian. He said a game is a form of art in which participants, termed players, make decisions in order to manage resources through game tokens in the pursuit of a goal. That's very academic. All right, let's shorten it down a little bit. Andrew Rawlings and Ernest Adams, in one of their books, defined it shorter. One or more causally linked series of challenges in a simulated environment. That's a little easy to grasp. My favorite definition, though, comes from a gentleman by the name of Sid Meier. Anybody here know who Sid Meier is? Who are our gamers? What's Sid Meier famous for? Civilization, for starters, yeah. He defined it as simply a series of interesting choices. A series of interesting choices. And I love that definition. So let's parse this out a little bit and find the really important recurring ideas in here. So in the game, you are making decisions. That's really critical. Interesting choices, making decisions. Critical to what makes a game a game. There's a goal involved. And you've got to overcome some challenges to get to that goal. So 3 critical parts of what makes a game a game. You've got to have a goal, you've got to have challenges, and you've got to be able to make some decisions along the way to do so. Those are 3 parts of what makes a game a game. And what is fun? Well, I actually found a book called A Theory of Fun. Can you believe that? A Theory of Fun for game design. A gentleman by the name of Rob Coxer, who was designer for some of the bigger, more successful multiplayer online games. And he wrote this wonderful book, which I highly recommend everybody. It's on the back of your handouts. It said, fun arises out of mastery. It arises out of comprehension. It's the act of solving puzzles that makes games fun. In other words, with games, learning is the drug. This is reassuring to my cohorts, my comrades in the learning industry. By the way, the first time I presented this was for a meeting of ASTD, which is now ATD, shortly down. Learning is the drug. That's what games are in the end. The teachers. Fun is just another word for learning. I'm not sure what broke in our typical school system to say fun on the learning part. They managed to do that. And in reality, if you think about how games are really structured, it is a learning process where you're learning what works, what strategies don't work, how to defeat your opponents in the process and doing so. So I really do tend to believe that he's correct in that definition, that fun is just another word for learning. But then I wanted to look at what it is that motivates us when it comes to actual work. And one of my favorite authors and one of my favorite books in the last several years is one called Drive. Has anyone here read Drive? Okay. A couple of people who've read Drive. Presentation how?
Yes, based on that, we had a presentation here.
Oh, really? Wonderful. Okay, so you guys are ahead of me on this one. Well, for those of you who weren't here for the presentation, let me summarize the key points. But on the back of your handout, I also give you the terms to look for to Google to find the video. There's a wonderful little 11-minute video out there online. If you Google the term RSA Animate Drive, you'll find this video. But I really recommend reading the whole book. Here are a couple of things that Dan Pink always backs up any of his points with a lot of really good solid research. First thing he found was that everything that we thought about carrots and sticks was wrong. Everything we thought about, well, you want people to produce, you want people to get more productive, offer them more money, offer them a bonus. And if they don't produce, threaten to fire them, threaten to punish them. All of that stuff doesn't work. It used to work when you were doing work that required no thought. When you were doing pure manual labor, when it was just a big process that you could just follow the recipe, follow the steps, and the faster you could do it, the more you could get reward. Then it worked. But things got a lot trickier and everything turned upside down when you started getting into work that requires any form of creativity, any kind of problem solving, any kind of thought. And he found that in those kinds of tasks, if you offer people some small rewards, some kind of recognition, then it could increase your ability, it could increase your output a little bit. But what was really astounding was when you upped the rewards, it really got people's attention, and you would think it would really motivate them, people became worse. People's productivity dropped. People had a tougher time solving problems. People were less creative. People took fewer risks. So it actually impaired the creativity to have a big reward attached to whoever produced the biggest or the best in whatever competition. And he found that if you attach a reward to any kind of a creative task, that extrinsic rewards, if you do this, then I will give you that reward, give you this money, give you this car, give you this whatever. If you start attaching rewards on an if-then basis, then that motivation took away people's intrinsic motivations. And suddenly they're just doing it for the reward and become less productive as a result and less creative as a result. He did find, of course, that money is kind of important. Anybody here does not want money in your work? Maybe you want to work entirely for free. But he found that the only real purpose for money is to keep people from worrying about it. If you pay people enough so that they aren't worrying about how am I going to pay the rent, then their creativity gets unleashed. Then they suddenly can start focusing on things that are more fun, more productive, more valuable to the company. And if you think about it, we all have a certain threshold. If I'm not making this much money, then I come home every week and I'm worried about, do I pay the rent, or do I put food on the table, or how am I going to pay for my kids' new shoes? And that destroys and impairs your ability to really be productive. But once you've reached that threshold where you can say, okay, I can pay all my bills, I can afford to go out to eat every once in a while, I'm not out buying big luxuries, but I'm comfortable. Then the other things start becoming more important. You can start focusing on what gives you more fulfillment. And the book goes further into defining what are the three key things he found that motivate people consistently across the board in any kind of task, in any kind of work that requires thought and problem solving and creativity. These are the three things that he found: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, do I get to make my own decisions? Do I get to decide where I'm going to work, when I'm going to work, how I'm going to do my job, how I'm going to go about solving these problems, how I'm going to fix things? Mastery, do I have skills that I'm good at, that I can get better at, that I can continue to challenge, that I can continue to develop? Are there challenges and problems ahead of me that are going to be a little tough to solve, but I know I can overcome them? And purpose, why am I doing this? Is there a reason? Is there a motivation? Is there a goal that I can get behind, that I value? Is this work accomplishing something that I care about? So autonomy, mastery, and purpose, he found, are the three big motivators in our creative economy, as opposed to the carrots and sticks, the money, the bonuses, the threats, and so on that used to work when we were all just doing manual. Make sense? You with me on this? And then here was my big aha about the whole thing. Because I remember it back just a few slides ago. I remember it back 3-4 minutes. To what were the things we were focusing on as game designers?
Same thing.
Decision making, challenges, and goals. And I went, oh my God, the same thing I try to put into our games can motivate people in their work and can make work fun and fulfilling. If you guys remember nothing else about that, that's the cool thing. This is what just blew my mind. Autonomy, independent decision making. Mastery, overcoming challenges. Having a purpose, having goals. Same thing. What motivates us for games, what will get my players to stay up all night playing these games, is the same thing that can really make our work more fulfilling. So, here's our challenge next. How do we design a game that we call work? How do we design a game that we call work? And I will warn you, you're not going to get much respect for this. Jung, you go back as far as Jung, and he said, one of the most difficult tasks people can perform, however much others may despise it, is the invention of good games. And I validated this when I was doing research with the e-learning guild on game-based learning, that you can get game-based learning done and you can get your companies to support it and pay for it as long as you don't use the word game. So we renamed all of that immersive learning simulations. Immersive learning is really good because we can turn it into a TLA, a three-letter acronym, ILS. Yes, boss, we want a budget of several $100,000 to produce an ILS. Oh, sure, no problem. You know, you start coming in here, we want to have several $100,000 to make some games for our employees. But we're going to make it a game called Work. So we're going to make a game called Work. We need to start with having some kind of important goals behind our work. And if you think about it, that really is critical to what we do in our jobs. Who here gets excited about going into work in the morning so we can raise the shareholder value of our stock by 4 cents this quarter? Anybody? Who would want to go into work because I know I can help reduce our dependence on foreign oil, help improve the environment, reduce global warming, and make everybody's lives better?
I'm a solar engineer.
There you go. Okay? So we want to have important goals. We want to feel like our work is making a difference in people's lives. The legend I go back to is an old trainer's tale about the 3 stonecutters. Guy's walking down the road into town, and he runs across a guy by the side of the road who's cutting a big block. And he goes, well, excuse me, sir, can I interrupt you? Can I ask you, what is it you're doing? And the guy goes, can't you see I'm cutting stone? You know, it's a tough job, it's hot outside, but I got kids to feed, I got to put food on the table, and, pay for it, everybody's got to have a job, so I'm cutting this stone. Okay, thanks, everybody. Gets a little farther down the road, sees another guy doing what looks to be the exact same thing, so he asks this guy, what are you doing? He says, sir, I am a stonecutter, a professional stonecutter. You see how smooth the surface is, how sharp the corners are? My stones are going to go into a building and fit so perfectly, so smoothly, that you will not be able to find a single crack or crevice anywhere. Great. That's a little bit better of an answer. Goes a little farther down the road, finds a third guy doing what looks to be the exact same thing. Says, sir, what are you doing? Me. I'm helping build a great cathedral so that our entire community of people can gather together in praise and worship of our God and build this sense of community and belonging among our people. So which of those 3 had the greatest sense of fulfillment and joy and essentially play in their work? The last one, because he connected it to a goal that he valued, some purpose that he believed in. I found in the years of doing career coaching, very, very rarely would I have somebody come into me as a career coach and say, can you help me find a job that just pays more money? Almost never happened. What I would inevitably get was somebody saying, I am not finding my work to be meaningful. My work is not fulfilling. Can you help me figure out what I want to be doing that's more fulfilling and more meaningful? They needed to find a greater sense of purpose in their work. So if you're running an organization, it's really critical that the organization make that connection between what is it that is the mission of our company and what it is that you are doing to contribute. Companies really need to do a better job of communicating to all of the employees. How is it that what we are doing this quarter is not just the bottom line of how much profit we're making or how much we sold, but how are we making our people's lives better? And then connect the goals of your job to that bigger mission that the organization is in charge of. You can often find this more easily when you work in a small company than when you work in a big one. So I've worked in a lot of small startups, companies that 50 people or less. I've worked for IBM, I've worked for GM. It's a lot tougher in those companies to go all the layers and layers and layers to the point where you can see the impact of the work you're doing 5 layers deep of bureaucracy to how it's benefiting the customer. But I want you to think about, and in particular when you are interviewing for a job, one of the critical questions to ask in an interview, ask of the employer, how would you define the mission of this job? You'll notice employers will give you a big, long job description of duties and responsibilities. But I want you to boil it down for me. What's the mission? How are we making a difference with this job? I find that's one of the most revealing questions you can ask in an interview. Let's talk about decision making. This guy's facing an important decision. Right? Almost a life or death. All right. There are companies that offer interesting new variations on offering autonomy for their employees. More companies are doing what we refer to as a responsible adult vacation policy. They do not define how many days or weeks of time off you get for your vacation. They say, we consider you to be a responsible adult. When you want to take time off, take time off. As long as you are up to date on whatever your commitments, whatever your deliverables are for your coworkers and for your team. If you need to go get your kid to a soccer game this afternoon, go do it. So they're giving their employees more flexibility. Bizarre Voice, one of the more successful companies in town, pioneered this many years ago when they started. Google. Who's familiar with Google's 20% time? Okay. Most of you have not heard of Google's policy that says all employees get to spend 20% of their work time on whatever the heck you want to. Spend 20% of your work time on anything you feel like that is going to be fitting with the general mission of Google. So who here has ever used Gmail? You've benefited from 20% time. About half of Google's real interesting breakthroughs have come from employees' 20% time projects. Things where they just came up with an idea. Got a few other co-workers together and said, you want to work with me on this? And we can use our 20% time to try out a new idea. And that's produced more breakthrough hour by hour, employee by employee than the other 80% Google's time. Other companies like Best Buy have experimented with this concept of a results-only work environment. There is no 8 to 5. There is no we expect you to be in your seat by 8 o'clock a.m. We expect you to go home at 5. Now this, by the way, is the corporate headquarters. It's not the stores. Responsibility of the stores means we have to have the store open at 9 a.m., so we expect you to be there at 9 a.m. But for their corporate headquarters, it was much more like we want to make sure all of our employees know what their goals are, what their job mission's about, what their expectations and deliverables are. But beyond that, when you come in, when you go, how you do that is up to you. And this was one of the areas where I think back when I was working in the game industry, we were very much pioneering. Because most of my game development team, we would come in by about the crack of noon. And nobody complained. There weren't any bosses going, aren't you supposed to be? Yeah, no, okay, if I had a meeting at 11 o'clock, then I'd expect them to be there by then. But otherwise, they came in when they felt like it. And then if I came back into the office at 10 o'clock at night, many of them would still be there, working on it. As long as we met the milestones and deliverables that I, as a producer, was expecting of them, I didn't care. And more companies are like that. Think about the difference between when you were in high school and when you went to college. In high school, when the bell rang, the teacher took attendance, right? And what happened if you weren't there in your seat when the bell rang? You were tardy. You got in trouble. You had to do detention. And then you graduate from high school and you go up to college. And if the bell rings when the class starts in college, and you're not there, what happens? Nothing. Okay, you didn't want to show up for class, don't show up for class. Our midterm is next week. If you can pass the midterm, great. Don't worry about it. You get your assignments in, the deliverables in, have somebody take the lecture for. I don't care. And they treated you like a responsible adult in college. Some people adapted well, some people didn't quite deal well with that autonomy. But that was a kind of make or break growth experience for a lot of students, from a high school environment where you were expected and you were punished and you were controlled to a much more free, autonomous environment. So think about in your work, how much do you have or how much do you want to have in terms of control of your work tasks, how you do them, when you do them, where you do them, with whom you do them. Would telecommuting be an important option for you? Would that flexibility of your work time be an important option for you? Do you want to have a manager who's very clear about you need to get your job done by following A, B, C, D, E, F, and G? Or would you ever rather have a manager that says, I want you to go take that bill, you figure out how you're going to go do it, just go back and let me know. So ask in the interview, in what areas would I have autonomy for how I do my job? That's a critical question to be asking. I also found one of the critical things about making a game fun were the unique team roles. Who here's ever played Dungeons and Dragons? Where's my D&D players in the group? All right. Okay. Any old school back in the 70s or 80s? There we go. Maybe still have your 20-sided dice? So if you go back to the original edition of D&D, you could choose one of 4 possible roles. Current new edition, 5th edition, just came out this year. You have dozens and dozens of possible types of characters. The original D&D, you had 4. You had the fighter, you had the thief, you had the wizard, you had the cleric. The fighters were, of course, the guys that carried the big weapons and the big armor to go toe-to-toe with the monsters and go whack, whack, whack on the monsters with their weapons. And they would suffer the damage. The thieves were the sneaky ones that would go scout out ahead in the dungeon, check for the traps, look for where the hidden treasure was, and could backstab opponents when they weren't looking. The wizards could cast spells that would affect a whole group of monsters or change the environment around you and had great impact on everything in the whole board. And for me, I think the most important role of the whole team were the clerics. Because when you got wounded, these were the guys that could heal you back up. These were the guys that could protect you. So many, many times in the game of D&D, my friend called, "Cleric!" Over here. They just got critically down to 3 hit points, cleric! But what made that game work was the fact that we all had different roles. We weren't the same character. So in any adventure, I knew there were going to be several times a night when the spotlight would be on me, when I was doing the most important thing that my team valued me for. And I think that sense of fulfillment that I got out of a game of Dungeons and Dragons is critical in our work as well. So ask in the interview, what unique role would I be serving on the team? How does what I do make a difference in the framework of the team structure? How is my team going to depend upon me for what? And that's part of what makes your work more satisfying. Challenge. Let's define what makes a challenge. If we want to learn basketball, how would you become a great basketball player? Should I put you up against a 5-year-old kid? Would you win?
Yeah.
Probably pretty easily. Okay. If I put you up against Michael Jordan? Probably not. So the first case, I might build my confidence for a little while. The second case, I might really get to see an amazing basketball player, but it wouldn't improve my skills. The third case, the place where you really get the most learning and the most growth, is if I gave you a series of opponents, each one a little bit better than you are at the time. And you can figure out ways to up your game, ways to get better, ways to beat that challenge that's just a little bit ahead of where you are. And that was what we were trying to do as game designers. So mastery comes from facing these challenges that are just slightly better than you are, and then devising the ways that you're going to overcome them. We worked this kind of a curve. We tried it when we were designing our games. Tried to figure out if we made things too difficult for your ability, you got into the area of frustration. If we made it too easy for your ability, we got into an area called boredom. But if we could find the right flow somewhere in between, not too difficult, not too easy, as you grew and got better and better with your skills, that's where we hit that flow, that zone, where you were keep trying again and again and again and getting better and better and better and facing more and more difficult challenges along the way. How do we find these challenges in our work? Well, we set our goals. We set higher and higher performance goals. People who really get good in sales, they love having their quotas upped just a little bit each quarter. I know I can beat last quarter's performance. It comes from competition, although you've got to be careful about how you structure that. It comes from having social pressure and support, working together but supporting each other to getting better. Active conflict, again, I don't recommend that in the workplace. It's fine in the computer games. Also, limiting your resources, limiting your time. Can I get this done for less money? Can I get this done in a shorter amount of time? If I was creating a business simulation and gave you $1 million to start up a successful business, you think you could do that? Most of us could probably get a business off the ground if we gave you $1 million. If I gave you $100 to try starting a successful business, that's a little bit more of a challenge. So think about what kinds of limitations you can set for yourself to make it more challenging and of course you're better. But you want to know in the job, what are the most critical skills I'm going to need to master and develop in my work? And have that as one of the questions to be asking. Also be asking, how am I going to develop these skills? How am I going to get better at what I do? Because one of the things that can make our jobs hell is if I end up feeling like I am doing exactly the same thing I did last year with exactly the same level of difficulty and exactly the same challenge. Yeah.
Then why is it that companies keep eliminating training?
Because they figure that it's something that is not going to impact our bottom line this quarter.
Would you repeat the question?
The question was, why do companies keep eliminating training? And I think it's one of those things where companies can get very short-sighted because we need to tighten our belts this quarter and make sure we improve our profitability this quarter, and training is really an investment for the future. So it goes back, if any of you have ever read Covey, the seventh principle about Covey is all about sharpening the saw. And it goes back to the reason he calls it sharpening the saw is that the story that he tells is how a guy runs across a guy who's out in the forest and he's trying to chop down a tree, and he's got a saw that you can see is totally blunt, totally dull, has no edge to it whatsoever. And he asks the guy, excuse me, what are you doing? He said, I'm trying to cut down this tree. It's taking me forever. He said, well, why are you using such a dull saw? Why aren't you sharpening it? He said, I don't have time. I got to get this tree cut down. And so that kind of short-sightedness, companies are all too easily succumb to. That's a good question. And those of us in the room who are trainers looking for good training opportunities pound our heads against the wall about that question all the time. The other thing I think companies need to get better at is encouraging risk-taking. Companies always say, we want our employees to take risks, and what happens when you make a mistake? Yeah, right. I'll actually go farther. I don't want to say encouraging risk-taking. I want to change it to celebrating failure. Let's celebrate failure. If you think about how games are structured, the whole cycle of a game is you do something, you play so far, and eventually you're going to do something that's going to kill you. Eventually you lose a life, you're going to fail, the game can be over and so on. But once a game is over, once you've lost your last life, are you left feeling depressed and dejected, or are you more motivated than before? Most of us are more motivated because we go, oh wait, if I only went left instead of right there, if I only tried hitting him with this instead of that, then I might be able to overcome it. So you get more motivated, essentially paradoxically, by failure in games. As long as that failure is safe to do, safe to make mistakes, safe to try out, and then learn from it. So the best companies really do encourage those risks as long as you learn from those mistakes. Randy Pausch used to have, if anybody ever watched The Last Lecture, it was one of the first viral videos on YouTube. I highly recommend you looking up The Last Lecture. When he taught his computer science classes, he used to give out at the end of each semester what was referred to as the first Penguin Award. First Penguin Award was so named because if you look at how penguins survive in the Antarctic, where is the food for penguins? Water. Under the ice, in the water. Where are the predators for penguins? Same place. Same place. So the flock of penguins needs to have somebody to be brave enough to go down under the ice to go looking for the food, right? They have somebody who's brave enough to risk making the first mistake. And so he would give out an award to the student group whose project failed in the most ambitious and spectacular manner. The first Penguin Award. Anyone who doesn't make mistakes just isn't trying hard enough. So, ask, what kinds of new ideas can you try in this job? Where do you get to experiment? Where do you get to try out new ideas and new things? And find out how risk-supportive or risk-averse the company is in that process. Games all involve scorekeeping of some sort. Now, how do we typically keep track and how do we typically score our performance at work? Usually comes in this form. The annual performance review. You're wondering what your rating is. I haven't told you all year long. Now it's time to tell you all the things that you've done wrong. So typically these performance reviews are done how often? Once a year. And if you really think about it, what's the time span of the performance that you're really being evaluated on?
Last week.
Just in the last couple of weeks or so. This is the Santa Claus phenomenon. Right? We're getting close to Christmas, right? And Santa Claus is supposed to reward all the good boys and girls. In reality, if you had kids, when do they actually start behaving nicely, worrying about Santa Claus? Usually it's right around December 12th, I think, when my kids would start behaving nicely, because they figured their performance review from Santa was just going to be on the last couple of weeks. Okay? And we think about what it is that we typically get measured on in our workplace performance. What's the most common across-the-board measurement of how hard of a worker we are?
It's something they'll tell you on your performance review.
Yeah.
Not before.
You can find out after the review is done. But I'll tell you, this is the most common thing. It's time. Okay?
It's easy.
If I have a coworker who I know is always in first thing in the morning, always works late at night, what's the assumption I make about him or her? They're a hard worker.
It's a wheelbarrow principle.
They put in the wheelbarrow. Tell me what the wheelbarrow principle is.
Benjamin Franklin used to push around an empty wheelbarrow a half an hour before everybody went to work and a half hour after everybody went home.
Yeah.
So he developed the reputation of being industrious and he was pushing an empty wheelbarrow.
And in between those hours,
He could do whatever he
he'd be down at the pub, right? No worries. Okay, so sorry, yes. So he was saying that Benjamin Franklin had the reputation as a hard worker, partially because early in the morning, before most other people got to work, he'd be pushing the wheelbarrow across town. And then a half an hour after everybody finished their work, he pushed the same empty wheelbarrow back across town. So everybody would see him before they were working, after they were working, and make an assumption that he's a really hard worker, even if he spent the rest of the day in between in the pub. You know, right? Okay. I'm gonna remember that story. Thank you very much. I like it. But way too often we make assumptions about what kind of employee they are by their butt time. Or sorry, face time. Face time. But it's how much time somebody spends in the office, obviously visibly at work. There got to be some better measurements. There's got to be some better measurements. So let's think about some of the things that have been a little bit more creative in terms of measuring people's performance. Again, I go back to Randy Pouch, the guy who came up with the last lecture. And one of the things he used to do with his classes, he would have a variety of projects, and each project he'd have a new mix of teammates to be working with on the project. And at the end of each project, you would get rated by your teammates on how hard did he or she work, how creative were your contributions, how easy were you to work with. If you got a couple of those ratings from a couple of individuals, then it can be very subjective. When you get a dozen to 15 of those ratings gathered together statistically, it becomes a much more objective piece of data. And so suddenly you can start doing a better job of evaluating where do I need to up my game based upon that kind of feedback. Nike, they began years back with this concept of the Nike Plus because they wanted to get their customers to wear out their shoes faster. Good business strategy, right? Let's get our customers to wear out our shoes faster. By having this device that they could put in their shoes that would give you feedback on how far you've run, how fast you've run, could track you and your progress, and then upload the data to your smartphone so you could share and compete and so on. Anybody here have any kind of a fitness wristband on you? Right. Okay, what do those things do?
Right.
All they do is gather data, right? All they're doing is measuring your performance. There's nothing motivating. They're not feeding you a cookie, right? They're not making you feel good by just wearing them. They're just tracking data. And we find that having that data, having that kind of scorekeeping, is its own reward. A meaningful measurement is its own reward. Why do those wristbands work? Because they give me meaningful measurements about how hard I'm working toward my fitness goals. So you want to have good measurements in your work, things that are objective, things that are frequent, more often than once a year, things that reflect how well you are mastering the skills that are important to your job, that are mostly in your control, that are aligned with larger goals, balance out quality measures and quantity measures. One of the dilemmas about, for example, a lot of customer service environments, they might measure you more on how many calls that you take compared to the quality of the solutions you give your customers. So you got to balance out both of those things. And don't directly tie those just specifically to extrinsic rewards and punishments. But the reward, the measurement itself can be its own reward. So use several in balance. And another important question to be asking in this process then is, how is performance measured in this job? If you understand that going into the job, you're going to have a much better idea of, is this going to be a fun job for me? Is this going to be something where I'm going to feel rewarded for the things that I do and I do well? And then we discovered as game designers a lot of important principles about feedback and rewards. First thing we learned was that Skinner was right. You are familiar with basic psychology experiments about getting mice to push little pedals to get their rewards. We discovered human beings perform exactly the same way. And to the extent that we would often discuss what rewards we put into a game and use the term rat chow. What kind of rat chow are we going to put in this level for our players? So, don't tell my fellow game designers. Biggest motivator by far is making progress. If you can see what kind of progress you are making toward your goals, that in and of itself is motivation. One of my fellow game designers, George McDonald, I love this quote, said, "I could get players to happily spend all day long chopping down trees with large fish if I gave them the right feedback and rewards." If you can come up with good, meaningful measurements for your progress and give them the right recognition rewards, you can do meaningless tasks. And if you go back to when I was designing games back in the early 80s, you were moving this little dot across the screen to that little dot, to that little dot over here to this little. What were we doing with Pac-Man? They were little blobby dots on a screen, right? Totally meaningless, but we played that for hours. Chopping down trees with large fish if you had the right feedback and rewards for it. So, ask, how do you recognize and reward employees? What's the forms of recognition? And you want to think about the things that are meaningful to you. We also refer to recognition in games in terms of shiny badges. What kind of shiny badge does a player earn by getting this bar? And yeah, they do work, if you feel like you earned them. So here's some examples. You can sort of see them. Anybody ever was a Boy Scout or have a kid who's a Boy Scout? Girl Scout, same difference? Okay. Merit badges? How much do we work for merit badges? Right? Can you sell any of them on eBay? No? Right? Anybody involved in any kind of martial arts? Right? How hard did you work to get your belts? Get your black belt? Put in a lot of hours doing that? Right? Can you sell that belt for anything on eBay? Is it actually intrinsically worth anything? No. But it represents, it is symbolic of the effort you put in to earn those. The one in the middle here, by the way, it's a little hard to see on this screen. This is an Electronic Arts Star Performer Award circa 1986, thereabouts. So here it is, all these years later, I still have this little shiny badge that I earned for one particularly difficult problem that was keeping us from shipping the game that I helped solve. So I didn't get a bonus. They didn't give me several $1,000s for solving this problem. But I put in a few extra hours. I kind of pulled an all-nighter to figure out the solution to a technical problem that one of our designers was having. And we were able to ship the game on time. And I got a shiny badge. And I felt good. My company recognized me for putting in that effort. You know, they could have just stuck a few $100 extra bucks, and that might have felt nice. But I wouldn't. 20, 30 years later, I would have forgotten. This I still have. So if you know that you've earned them, that in and of itself can make things rewarding. Performance and progress tracking in our work, any kind of displays. Companies can start doing more of those things. Award certificates, team recognition events. Recognition that goes to higher ups. When my manager sent an email about the incredible thing that I did and copied her boss's boss, that really made me feel good. Thank you cards, gift baskets, time off, schedule flexibility. They don't need to be big monetary rewards, but something that just recognizes the fact that what you did, what you mastered, what challenges you overcame were appreciated and valued by people around you. Okay, was that a hand up or just a yawn?
Just you.
Okay. I'm sorry. But you don't want to have this absolute tie of an if-then expectation to the extrinsic path, because then we end up doing what Dan Pink discovered earlier, that tying that if-then motivation then reduces the fun, the intrinsic motivation, and replaces it. So you want to ask yourself, what kinds of recognition and reward do you most value? Some of us are extroverts. We love having everybody in the company applaud us for something we did. Some of us are introverts, and just getting a nice little handwritten note from your manager or something behind the doors that says, I really appreciate what you did, makes more of a difference. So ask them then, how do you recognize and reward in this job? And one of the most valuable things and valuable tools that we had as game designers was the element of surprise, the element of the unexpected. So as an example, when I was first putting this presentation together, I was right in the middle, literally in the middle of working on this PowerPoint, when I get a call from the reception desk in the lobby. So there's something for you out here at the desk. And waiting for me out at the desk was a box from Tips Treats. And a note of appreciation from my boss at the time, Krista, said, Linnell and Jeff, I appreciate y'all stepping in with a moment's notice, working 2 days before. We held out at a conference on the last minute, kind of, they needed a substitute. And so my coworker Linnell and I volunteered to help out like that. Share these treats as you see fit. So yeah, I did feel duty-bound to share them with Linnell. But not before. But it was a total surprise, and it made me feel recognized and rewarded. Now, if she had told me 2 weeks earlier, hey, I need you to go work at this conference, I'll give you some cookies if you do it, I would have felt insulted. But she didn't make that kind of an if-then commitment. Instead, she said, I really could use your help. Volunteered. A week later, after everything is said and done, I get this surprise. And that makes a big difference, having that element of surprise. So, I want to wrap things up. The last idea comes from James Michener. And I found this book, and I love this, what he said about it. The master in the art of living makes little distinction between his work and his play, his labor and his leisure, his mind and his body, his information and his recreation, his love and his religion. He hardly knows which is which. He simply pursues his vision of excellence at whatever he does, leaving others to decide whether he is working or playing. To him, he's always doing both. So that's what I wish for you guys, to be able to turn your work into play. I can tell you for a fact, I've had fun playing with you guys for the last hour. So I thank you guys for giving me a chance to play. And I would get, we got a question back in the back.
Yeah, I'm wondering, who is really responsible for turning work into play? Because the reason I ask is because a lot of companies will have, these, annual feedback on corporate culture, etc. But it seems to find the games always are sort of a take it or leave it thing, aren't they? I mean, here it is, suddenly we have a fan base, we have critics, we have nothing.
So I think part of it is finding those companies who have a culture that recognizes the value of, let's not use the word game, but that recognizes the values of what Dan Pink was talking about, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. The best companies in town, if you take a look at the list of the Austin American Statesman or the Business Journal or Glassdoor, of those companies that get ranked highest for best places to work, you will see on their websites, in their culture, in the people they talk to, how do we give autonomy to our employees? How do we give them challenging assignments that they can master? How do we measure their performance in ways that really are meaningful? And how do we all have a sense of mission and purpose about our work? So then, it moves down from there into a more collaborative process between you and your manager of defining what areas will you trust me with autonomy. How do you want to measure what I'm doing? And bring that down to a collaborative process. So certainly you're not getting to make all the rules. But you want to be able to find somebody who's playing the game, as it were, in a way that's meaningful to you. Does that make sense? Yeah.
examples, other than Bizarre Voice, of what you consider to be based on exemplary employers based on?
Exemplary employers?
I'd say local.
Yeah, local. I think that if you really looked around, I would go to that list of the best companies to work for on there and talk to many of those. Companies that have some really good company culture. I've worked with people who work, for example, for Keller Williams. They have a really good, solid company culture. There's another one I was talking to recently called Q2E Banking. I've got some friends and former coworkers who are there. But typically those are the smaller companies whose cultures have started up within the last, say, 10 to 15 years, where they can build a company culture from scratch and really be more enlightened about how they do that. But you will find many, many lists of those out there. I do recommend, if you've ever looked Glassdoor, is getting a better job of being able to have that data to do that. Yeah, back.
Yeah, a question on your, first off, I really appreciate it. Real nice to like you. One of the things I was wondering about is the interactive learning system, the ILS that you've been talking about.
Immersive learning simulations.
Interactive. Is that the high school, some of the high schools like Mount Rock have a game design program for freshman and sophomore high school students.
Yeah.
Has this ever been presented to some of those classes in a group setting?
I have not been invited to talk to them yet. But if you know somebody who wants to ask me in, take my information. I would be delighted to talk to any of those aspiring game designers. The first thing, by the way, I do get asked questions all the time from aspiring game designers. If you didn't hear his question, he was asking about the Round Rock high school program in game design. First thing I tell any aspiring game designers is, don't go there. Mama doesn't have to babies grow up to become game designers. It's a very difficult industry to thrive in, unless you really love 80-hour work weeks with no job security whatsoever. All right, we are wrapping things up. I'll be glad to chat with anybody else who's got some questions afterwards. So we're running out of time, so we'll turn things back on over. And I thank you guys again.
Yes, sir.
Here's the thought I want to leave with. How do you turn work into play? It's a series of interesting choices.